Welcome to the Fantasy Wildcard. I'm your host, Kev, and you can follow me on Twitter at dynasty_goat. And with me this afternoon, as always, is Matt, and you can follow Matt at MattFFDynasty on Twitter. Good afternoon, Matt. How are you?
Evening, Kev. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Been looking forward to this show for a long time, so yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Good stuff. I must admit, I'm feeling a little bit tender today. I had a curry last night, and it's all I can really say is it went in as a Keenan Allen, and it's come out as a Mike Williams.
What? Starting with the bad jokes already, Kev. Jesus.
Yeah, we have to give Mike Williams some stick, but speaking of Mike, we've got the other end of the spectrum, someone that's a lot better Mike, in fact, that's on our show today. He's our guest. We're very excited to welcome him on. He's the co-host of the Fantasy Intervention. He's a Twitter funny man, the owner of the Podfather, and he's also the retweeter of positivity. You can follow him on Twitter at Daddy's Home FF. We give a wildcard welcome to Mike.
What's up, guys? How we doing?
All good, all good.
Good. You got me. I think this is about as early as I get on camera, so you got me up and going in the afternoon, according to Kev, 9 o'clock in the morning. So
it's 9 a.m. where you are, Mike, isn't it? Yeah. Whereabouts are you in the world?
Down by Boston. So I am a northeasterner. So we got snow, we have cold, and it is early on a Sunday for us.
We appreciate you coming on, Mike.
Oh, of course. No, I've been excited about this for a while, but I think we talked about this probably a month ago. We got this on the calendar, so that's nice. I mean, the Dynasty Vipers usually give me about 4 minutes notice when they want me on the show, so you guys were far more polite than that.
Good stuff, Mike. And do you follow a team from around that area?
Yeah, I'm a Patriots fan. Have been long before the success, so I kind of got to reap the benefits of when we used to get blacked out because we wouldn't sell out the games because our stadium was horrible on metal benches. No one wanted to go. We had Tony Eason at quarterback, and we had that stretch where we tried out Michael Bishop. We had some fun times back then. Drew Bledsoe came along and started making us an actual franchise. Then obviously he took the hit, and that's when it all got born. But I was around. I don't want to date myself too much, but I was around quite a bit before that. So
I was just going to say you're showing your age there, Mike. With
a little bit, yeah. I think the beard does that for me too. The little the speckled gray in there. So
awesome, Mike. So on today's show, we'll be getting our guest Mike to discuss free agency dream landing spots from a dynasty perspective, where he'll be highlighting the key players due to hit free agency on March 17th. And where Mike would like them to land and their potential impact on the dynasty value. So we'll jump straight in at QB. The free agent QB market, it's pretty decent. The main marquee free agent is Dak Prescott, but we do fully expect him to be franchise tagged or signed to a long-term deal by the Cowboys. So outside of Dak, who's the QB you'd like to discuss their dream landing spot for dynasty, Mike?
Yeah, so I guess the first one we have on the list, right, is Jameis Winston. Yep. So when you look at Jameis, that is a simple one for me. Jameis as a quarterback doesn't necessarily excite me. He's not my style of player. So when you look at, first of all, NFL quarterback, that's not my style of quarterback. Not somebody I think is going to bring you really possibly anywhere past the wild card round, right? Like he's just not that type of player. Why I'm picking Jameis Winston to a particular landing spot, and you guys know this, is because it gets me excited about my boy. Jameis for fantasy will literally accelerate the weapons he has. And that's why going from the most nervous check down quarterback in the NFL in Teddy Bridgewater to Jameis Winston will be an absolute boom for the Panthers. And watch me dance on everybody who trashed my DJ Moore ranking. Everybody is getting a personalized tweet. I'm not going to do a blanket one like I did with Duke Johnson. Every one of you is getting tagged. When I said he was wide receiver 7, I might be too low. DJ Moore to the absolute moon if Jameis Winston gets there. That's what they're looking for, is someone to air it out. Give me Robbie Anderson. Hey, CMC goes up. He might even make Ian Thomas a thing. Like, that's how much he's going to throw the ball all over the field, absolutely reckless with it. That is what I'm looking for across the board. Is Carolina absolutely takes off with Jameis Winston under center. Now, he's still Jameis Winston, and the Panthers will still be trash. So don't think this is something where I'm saying now all of a sudden the Panthers are good. No, they'll be terrible. But they'll be so much fun to watch while they're terrible. That'll be exciting for me. So overall, Jameis Winston to Carolina is my bet, and it's truly because I want to see what he does with those weapons, not because I like him as a quarterback.
Yeah, I fully agree with this one, Mike. Obviously, Carolina, it's a great landing spot. I think it's one that we're all talking about, whether it's the upcoming rookies or a free agent signing. It's the ideal landing spot. I mean, as you said, Teddy Bridgewater, it was a top 10 quarterback through the first 10 weeks with Carolina. So just goes to show, even if someone like Teddy can put up those kind of fantasy numbers, I mean, wow, what can we see when if somebody like Winston drops there? So yeah, unbelievable opportunity to have. Obviously, when he was with the Bucs as well, he was the QB4 in 2019. It helped Godwin with his breakout year where he finished the wide receiver 2. Mike Evans, wide receiver 15. So he's shown that he can support these wide receivers. So I know you'll be liking that one for your DJ Moore fanboy. To me, it is a souped-up Teddy Bridgewater. He's got that bit of rushing in him that he can provide a few rushing touchdowns, but he's got the unbelievable arm talent as well, and he's not just a check down quarterback. He's definitely going to be airing the ball out. So, yeah, if he lands in Carolina, where would you bump him up to in your dynasty rankings, Mike? I think he's currently the QB 27.
Yeah, I mean, I'd move him up quite a bit. I would say that realistically, when you look at the way that I do rankings, I tend to look for my QB2, if we're looking at a one quarterback league, to be an upside play. So I still think I would like, let's say, Jalen Hurts, who I slate right now at quarterback 18. I still think I would like Hurts long-term over Winston. They're both a significant risk. So I would put him right about quarterback 19, quarterback 20. What that puts him over is your safe tier, what I like to call it, your Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr level quarterback. I think he goes over that. Now, what it depends on, and I see Toronto Dave in there, certainly the contract matters a lot. What it also depends on is, are we talking one QB or two QB? And realistically, the reason why I say that is when you look at a one QB ranking, they're a dime a dozen. And honestly, he's probably not going to end up on my roster, even in Carolina, because realistically, I'm only carrying one quarterback. And I don't see him ascending up to that. You know, Matt, you know my rankings. Trevor Lawrence at 9, Joe Burrow at 10, Justin Fields 11, Baker Mayfield 12. Like, those are your starters. I don't see him as valuable as Stafford. Going to a new team with Woods and Kupp, I think Stafford's just all around a much better quarterback, and he's who I have at number 14. So Winston would be a nice bye-week fill-in, but in Superflex, he'd be a really nice quarterback to, I'd say, yeah, probably 18 or 19 feels about right to me. And if he were able to put together, he's going to make me look stupid with that ranking. But I think when you look at the turnovers, when you look at the attitude, when you look at the quarterback class coming up this year, I do think whoever takes Jameis is still potentially looking for that franchise quarterback. So I don't think they're going to hand him the reins. I think he's going to be more of a bridge guy, which makes it really dangerous in Dynasty, because you are looking for, realistically, I don't play longevity at any position but quarterback. And that's one where you expect 8 to 10 years locked in. If you have a Burrow, you expect to have him for 8 years. Like, that's what you're banking on. Jameis, I see maybe 1 or 2 years max as the starter in Carolina if he ends up there.
Yeah, I agree with the assessment that Carolina's the premium QB landing spot. It's got the best pass catching running back in the league, which, Matt, is not Duke Johnson. It's Christian McCaffrey. Boom.
We just got to the first selection. You're already shooting me down. Jesus.
I started. I said I'm in a mischievous mood, didn't I? But yeah, like we said, Robbie Anderson, he's solid. DJ Moore, potential stud that we know that Mike loves. Did try trading for DJ Moore in a league with Mike, and I got firmly rebuffed on that one. But I then found out that he was Mike's dynasty wide receiver 7, so that'd be great for unlocking him. I do also really like Denver as a potential landing spot.
Kev, before you go any further, because I know that I have some people who follow me on Twitter, can you tell them who else you asked for in that trade?
They asked for what?
You asked for, I tell them who else you asked for, because I mean, most people who follow me know that asking for both DeAndre Swift and DJ Moore in a single trade is beyond crazy. If you follow me for 5 seconds, you literally went after my 2 favorites in one trade.
Yeah, it's pretty daft trade by me, but it was a tight end premium where I was giving you Kittle back, was it? And I was also giving you Dobbins, so.
Oh, it wasn't an awful offer, no, but you just went after two of my favorite blankets, you know.
I'll have to aim a bit lower next time, I think. But yeah, like I was saying, I also really like Denver. The duo of Sutton and Jude is promising. I also think Winston, with his pass volume, he could unlock Noah Fant as well. But fully on board with your selection, Mike, of Carolina. I agree with that. So I've just got a question for you, Mike, about if Winston does land with the Panthers, your dream landing spot, would you be viewing him as a long-term starter that you want to hold in Dynasty? Or do you think it presents you with a sell high opportunity as a potential future NFL journeyman?
Definitely sell high for me. Like we talked about, in one quarterback, probably not going to roster him. But when you're looking at in Superflex, my guess is you'll find somebody higher on Jameis than me. You'll find somebody who sees him at that ceiling that we talked about, Matt. I think you called it earlier, QB4 in 2019. I think that the move always presents opportunity. Like I always say, look at the news and find out, does it actually increase value? And if it doesn't, that's the time to trade more than anything else. And I think the Carolina news is going to vault him to a tier that I'm not personally comfortable with. And I think, honestly, as much as I like Stafford more than Winston, my guess is if Winston goes to Carolina, I could get Stafford plus for Winston. I think people will be factoring in the age. They'd be looking at the weapons. And that's a trade I make all day, twice on Sunday. I'd be trading him for like a Baker Mayfield plus. Like those are the types of deals that I think can shape your team. And the guy who gets them may be laughing at you year one, telling you how it all went down. And as we'll find out, you know, I keep receipts and I'll come back after that. Now, it all obviously depends also on your roster construction. Right? Like if you think that you're a home run away, and Kev, you just talked about in the league that we're in together, where I have Mahomes and Baker. I mean, Winston would be a really nice fit for that team just because it's stacked. You know, it's completely stacked that if I could somehow get him on my roster without giving up the safety of Baker, that would be gold for me. That'd be really what I'm looking for. And I have the 112 and the 201 in that league. I'd be willing to package both of those along with one of my young receivers if I have to, not the ones that we've talked about, the ones on the bench. You're not getting Tyreek or DJ Moore or AJ Brown in that deal. But let's say like a LaVisca Chenault, right? Like if I could do 112, 201, and Visca on that team because I'm so close to a championship, I'd be comfortable with that type of move. But that'd be about the ceiling for what I'd be willing to pay for Jameis Winston.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are. Sorry, Kev. I was going to say I think a lot of people are going to be targeting that upside that we know he's got. But I think that the key time for me would be to sell him mid-season. If he does come to Carolina and he starts shooting the lights out like he did when he was with the Buccaneers, obviously, we know he was brilliant for fantasy. We're winning people fantasy championships. But as an actual long-term asset, we knew he didn't have that longevity. So people are probably going to buy into the fact that, yeah, I'll get him. I'm going to win this championship, and then I'll deal with the consequences at the end of the season.
Yeah, I think pretty much anybody that goes to Carolina is going to become a potential sell high because it's such a nice spot. The only guy I wouldn't sell high if they went there was Deshaun Watson because I think he's unreal. But yeah, that wraps up I guess the only QB we really want to talk about. There's others like Trubisky, etc. But I think, like you said, Winston's the guy that you really like, and you like that dream landing spot there with the Panthers. So we'll move on to running back. At running back, there's one outstanding free agent for me, which I'm sure you'll be discussing soon, Mike. So who is the first running back you'd like to discuss their dream landing spot for Dynasty, please?
Well, it's Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is the guy that we're all watching right now. He's the one who realistically is going to see the biggest swing in value based on landing spot. And as I told you guys backstage, I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I was on with Chase before I gave him my landing spot. No, Chase, yours is Arizona, not mine. You know what mine is. But today I wanted to mix it up and give another option of where I think Aaron Jones could thrive. That's Pittsburgh. I think when you look at Pittsburgh, when you're reading the tea leaves, obviously you're coming to the end with Big Ben. And you're looking at that AFC North ground and pound, bell cow type running back. They tried to make do with that set of players, and Pittsburgh just couldn't. And what I think, if they want to move up the stack, what they need to do is get back to what they do best, which is defense and putting the ball on the ground. And I think Aaron Jones gets the work that we're looking for. Now, when you look at Pittsburgh, certainly they're a little different style than what my answer was. And Matt, I think you're going to pick that up after me, so I don't want to steal your thunder there. I do think they have a little different value in terms of how they're doing red zone. Chase in the chat talking about Arizona in the air raid offense. Yeah, of course, Aaron Jones would look great. Those are really the three spots that I think, Aaron Jones takes off in. Dave, I'm not going to leave you out. We're going to talk about your team in a minute. However, when you look at the three landing spots for Jones in particular, I'm looking for where can he get more workload, and specifically where can he get more red zone touches than he's getting in Green Bay. Now, when you look at Green Bay, everyone talks about, look at the snapshot, look at this, look at that. Devontae Adams is legitimately the best goal line back on the Green Bay Packers. The man gets more red zone touches, turns them into more touchdowns, and gets more 1-yard touches than I've ever seen. So he's taking so much. And obviously you see them going away from Aaron Jones in key spots. You saw Jamal Williams, A.J. Dillon getting shares in the playoffs. I want somebody where there's no other option. Benny Snell runs the guys on cement shoes. James Conner's gone. Jalen Samuel's not a thing. Pittsburgh realistically presents the largest share of touches that I think you're going to see. And I think Aaron Jones, when you give him the ball, has proven he's going to produce. So what I went with for this particular pick, and Matt, I want to hear what you talk about for the best fit we're going to have. But for this particular pick, I went for maximizing touches, and that's where I went with Pittsburgh for this particular call.
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh, it's probably the one spot that we're all hoping either one of these top free agents or one of the top rookie running backs lands on. It's just a perfect opportunity, I think, for any running back that comes in. I mentioned it last week, actually, on the podcast, that I fully think that Pittsburgh are going to go back to a more run-heavy offense. I mean, they went from the 26th ranked passing offense in 2019 and turned that into being the leading passing offense in 2020. So it just shows that they had to make adjustments last year. And I just think if they do get a top running back like somebody like Aaron Jones, then I do see that going back to more of a run-heavy offense. We know that Mike Tomlin as well is not afraid to have a workhorse running back. We've seen it before, obviously, Le'Veon Bell. We've seen what he can do. And I think that Aaron Jones has got a pretty similar skill set to what Lev Bell had. So, yeah, it just seems to all fit perfectly. As you mentioned, Big Ben, he's not getting any younger. And I just think somebody like Aaron Jones, it's going to take that pressure off him and offer a bit of a safety valve for him. So, yeah, the spot, I think it's absolutely brilliant for somebody like Aaron Jones. Do you think, though, it would actually be better for Aaron Jones in comparison to, obviously, he's been with Green Bay the last few years and he's finished the running back 2 and running back 5 over the last 2 years? Do you still think he's going to put those kind of numbers up in Pittsburgh?
I do, yeah. I think realistically, if he goes to one of the 3 landing spots, I think you're looking at 3 years of that type of production. And that's where you see I tend to have him higher than most in dynasty rankings because that's about the window that I'm playing in. So what I've talked about with Aaron Jones is I expect him to get the DeMarco Murray treatment, that second contract where somebody's bringing him in to literally beat the brakes off this man. Like they are going to keep feeding him until he falls apart. And what he has is, even though he's coming in, obviously we talk about, I know nobody wants to invest in running backs that are older than 14 at this point on Twitter. So I understand where everyone's coming from. I know, screw me, I'm an idiot. However, very little tread on the tires when you look at the usage coming in. When you look at like how these running backs that tend to break down were used before. You brought up a great example, Matt, and Lev Bell. We're talking historic level touches prior to that second contract. When you look at McCaffrey, I think the best thing could happen was getting hurt because he was on pace to do another, high 3s, low 4s touches. DeMarco Murray is a guy I referenced earlier that was getting those historic level touches. Aaron Jones doesn't have that wear and tear. He doesn't have a long injury history. There's been nothing significant with him. There's been dings here and there like every other football player. But realistically, you're getting about as young of a body on a 26-year-old as you're going to find coming into that second contract. So what I'm looking at, when you look at the way that I tend to play, I look at the cost of acquisition where he is right now, running back 18 and ADP, I think is insane. The cost is too low. And I think what you're going to end up having is you're going to end up doing what I did with Todd Gurley, which is I picked up Todd Gurley in a trade. I got him for a championship. I saw that insane level of touches. Obviously, there was whispers about the knee. They weren't yelling at that point. They were just whispers. And I moved him after that 2019 season for what actually turned into Travis Kelce and Jonathan Taylor. Got 3 first-round picks for him. Flipped 2 for Kelce. The third one was the 102. I don't know if I'll ever get that lucky again. But that level of trade, I truly believe you can get a dollar for dollar return on what you pay for Aaron Jones now, 2 years from now. So you're basically getting 2 years of a high-end running back for free if you time it properly. It is a little bit of a game of chicken because if you miss, you have Mark Ingram, right? And that's a problem. But if you time it properly, I do believe that you could get essentially what I consider 2 years of a free rental of a running back one. Where else are you going to find that? You're not going to get that on any other player but Aaron Jones because of how ridiculous people are with age. So that's how I'm playing it. 2 years in, let's see what it looks like. Let's see what the workload looks like. And let's see specifically what the contract looks like. I expect it to be a 3-year deal. If it's a 4-year, you might be able to extend it out a little bit. But the expectation is that they're going to basically push as hard as they can to get to that last year of the deal and then see what he has left in the tank. So those 2 years are going to be high volume on an extremely talented running back. So I'm all in.
Yeah, I love Aaron Jones as well, Mike. He's a touchdown machine every season. As a starter, he's scored 39 times in 42 games. So I don't think it's luck. He's just a very good player. He gives you 40 to 50 catches a year as well. But skill-wise, I actually have him very close to Alvin Kamara in terms of he could be used that way. Like if he was in New Orleans the past few years, I think he'd be matching those numbers of Alvin Kamara, if not even beating them. I think Pittsburgh's a great selection. He's performed in cold weather in Green Bay. And they are in a massive desperation of upgrading at running back. I think James Conner was fine at the start, but he's not the long-term answer. They need someone like Lev Bell, especially to take the pressure off Ben Roethlisberger. I do prefer Miami for Jones, though, just because I think it's better chance of usage like Kamara, where I actually think if he gets 25 touches a game, that's probably not using him to his full efficiency as such. But I do think in Pittsburgh, if he was to land there, it'd still be a great shout. I just prefer for him not to be the bell cow. The running back 18 in startups, I think that's extremely unfair in him. And like you said, he's a lot more talented than that. And if he does get a great landing spot, he's going to smash RB18 out of the park. So you mentioned that Jones to Pittsburgh would be amazing for his value. Post free agency, where would he sit in your dynasty rankings if he did end up with the Steelers?
I'm already insanely high on Aaron Jones. I actually had him as my running back 4 up until about 2 weeks ago, and I realized that might have been a little spicy. Yeah. So if he ends up in Pittsburgh or Kev, like you talked about, what's the dream landing spot, which is Miami. Myles Gaskin almost had as many red zone touches as Aaron Jones last year, and he only played in 12 games. So I would love that usage. I'd say right now where I have him as running back 10, it's going to be hard to jump up too much higher than that. I would probably put him over Dobbins if he were to land in Pittsburgh or Miami or, yes, Chase, Arizona. I'd probably move him up to number 9. I don't think that I could really vault him into that Cam Akers, Nick Chubb, Kamara, and Cook tier. That's a big jump with some uncertainty there. So that's about where I'd put him, is probably running back 9. So, Kev, in our league where you're trying to trade me J.K. Dobbins, don't ask for Aaron Jones if I get him. But that'd be about a fair spot. I think when you look at that tier, that's the tier that includes Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, Derrick Henry, and Antonio Gibson. I feel pretty comfortable with them in that spot as long as he lands in a decent spot.
Yeah, I think we're just all hoping for that ideal landing spot, aren't we, for Aaron Jones? We've heard it all before about the free Aaron Jones. Let's free him again and get him in a good spot.
Absolutely.
Smashing, Mike. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said on Aaron Jones there, that we do want him to land in a great spot, but it might be the flip of the next guy we're going to discuss about. It could actually be more beneficial for this guy to stay where he is. So who's your next guy you want to discuss, Mike?
Next on the list is Leonard Fournette, and honestly, Fournette's not going to get a bell cow role. He's not that guy. He's not that talent. Can't catch the ball. That becomes a little bit of an issue when you want to be a bell cow running back. So when you look at Leonard Fournette, he's really where he should be. He's on the team that's going to value him most. He's on the team that he's shown value to. And to be quite honest, he earned his next contract. There's not a lot in Tampa that is going to take from him. Him and Ronald Jones have proved to be able to coexist. Keyshawn Vaughn obviously is struggling to be involved in that offense. So I think Leonard Fournette in another year in Tampa is about as good as it's going to get. I wouldn't go too crazy on him at this point. I think that realistically, I took him in a startup mock, expecting him to be in Tampa. I took him about the 13th or 14th round. I feel pretty comfortable there as an off-the-bench bye-week fill-in. You know what you're going to get, those 7 to 10 points. You hope he gets in the end zone. That's really about all you're going to get for him. So I think when you look at what's best for him as a performer, it's Tampa. I think that's going to be his best chance to shine. Now, whether someone goes out and pays for him, I see, let others overpay for Lenny. Maybe someone will come out. I'd be shocked. I just don't think. I think the NFL showed how they value him with when he left Jacksonville. I think when you look at the NFL and you look at how they value these players, and honestly, I've been having this fight on another player on Twitter. When you see my rankings, another player you're not going to find on there besides Fournette is Josh Jacobs. I just think those types of players aren't valued in the NFL. They're not the type of player that I like to invest in. They're not the type of player that I think is a player that anybody in the NFL is going to go for. I think if you can't catch the ball, if you're not multifaceted, there's really not a spot for you anymore. Like, those days are over. So Fournette's best chance of getting touches is in Tampa. Whether they want to keep him or not, we'll see. If he hits the free agent market, I think he's going to sit there for a lot longer than people expect him to. I just don't see him being a target for any particular team.
Yeah, I think me and Kev both agree. We've mentioned it before on the podcast that we don't see him being a starter or getting loads of touches anyway. I think we've both discussed. I mentioned the Lions potentially as being a landing spot for him to work alongside John J. Swift. But as a Swift owner, I don't want that to happen. But it's a spot I could see where it can be used and be good for the team rather than actually in fantasy. I think he offers a good outlet for fellow running backs. But yeah, as you say, he had a disappointing regular season. He was the RB35, but yeah, become the hero in the playoffs and obviously in the Super Bowl. And I think he nearly produced as much in those 4 games than he actually did in the whole regular season. He would have had 21.7 fantasy points in those 4 games, so he was on pace to being an unreal running back in that 4-game sample size, and just looked a completely different player than what he was in the regular season. You mentioned the committee, obviously Ronald Jones is there, Keyshawn Vaughn, but I think Fournette, while he's not a pass catching back, he has shown he can do more with those catches than what somebody like Ronald Jones can do. So I fully agree with you, Mike, that I think it's a great spot for him to be in. He's shown that he can perform in that system, and if used right, who knows what can happen with Fournette? He could potentially become more of the lead guy in that backfield, and I think that's going to be your best place to get the maximum value out of somebody like Fournette. So what would you offer to acquiring them, Mike? You just said that you're not too high on him. What would you be willing to give up in terms of rookie picks to grab him?
Not a ton, especially in this particular draft. It is so deep and full of talent, right? That we're talking about, like, I'm getting Jamar Jefferson in the late second, early third. That's a player I'd still rather have than Leonard Fournette. You're talking about a known ceiling as opposed to a potential jump. Now, it's a riskier play, of course, but you're playing to win. So what that puts Fournette at for me is probably a high to mid-level 3rd-round pick. And I'd probably be waiting till I was on the clock, to be honest, just because this year is going to shake out so strange, as we're finding in these mocks. You and I jumped in one last week. You're seeing 1 or 2 guys fall. You're finding that you can get like a Brevin Jordan, a Pat Fryer, who we talked about, Jefferson. Even I'm seeing like Elijah Moore fall to the late 2nd round at this point. And man, would I be kicking myself if I gave up the potential to draft one of these guys for Lenny. I mean, I'd be miserable. So realistically, probably an on the clock ad if I was looking at maybe players that I don't particularly like being what's left, right? Like when you look at how it all plays out, if I'm looking at Stevenson, for example, or Fournette, I'd probably take Fournette. I don't really care for either player, right? If you're talking about like Eskridge or Fournette, I'd probably take Fournette when you're looking at that level of player. So it's hard because this draft is so strange that people are all over the map. So I'm trying to give you names instead of picks because that's kind of how I see it. Like I would be on the clock and I'd be like, screw it. Like last year, for example, Thielen's a guy who was older, but obviously still quite a player, and I could have used a wide receiver. So I was on the clock at 204, and the best player on the board that everyone was clamoring for was Zach Moss. And I was more than comfortable giving up Zach Moss in a pick for Adam Thielen, whereas, for example, if Gibson had fallen to that pick, there's no way you're prying that pick out of my cold hands for Adam Thielen. It's just not going to happen. So those are the types of moves when you're talking about those players. Let's face it, and I've gone on this a lot on Twitter. Now is not the time to be acquiring middle of the road running backs. If you want to swing for the fences like Kev did with DeAndre Swift, hell, go for it. He's not getting replaced. But what you find when you study the ADP of mid-level running backs, and what I mean by that is ADP 24 to 12 to 36, when you look at that level of ADP, what you find historically is acquiring a running back at that level right now, your best bet is possibly jumping up maybe 1 or 2 spots. And that would be if there's a fear of an uncertainty depressing the market. There's not too many of those out there right now. So really what you're risking is potentially acquiring Kerryon Johnson, is potentially acquiring Zach Stacy for those who've been playing for a little while. That's just not the move you want to make. You want to wait till post-NFL draft. You want to take a look at your rookie draft. These guys aren't going to gain value. Fournette's not all of a sudden going to jump a full round of value. There is nothing that could happen in free agency that would make me think Leonard Fournette is all of a sudden a high second. It's just not going to happen. So picking them up now, you're basically buying at cost and assuming risk for 0 reason. There's 0 gain. The only guy who picked up value in that tier that was even remotely significant last year was Austin Eckler. And the reason for that, if you recall, was at the beginning of this offseason, everybody thought Melvin Gordon was coming back. And his value was increased because Gordon signed with the Broncos. I don't see anywhere else where that type of market inequity is there. People are already vaulting A.J. Dillon as if Aaron Jones is gone. So that discount's not going to happen. Yeah. People are already looking at Rashad Penny. You're driving me crazy. People stop talking about him. But as if Chris Carson is gone, right?
You picked the wrong podcast to diss Penny on, Mike.
Oh, I know. And the last time we had an argument was Duke Johnson. Bring it. Because I was right then, too. That was in July of last year, if I remember correctly. Kev, thanks for retweeting that, by the way. I like making Matt feel good about this. But those mistakes have been corrected this year, and people are already valuing the RB2 on the team as if the starter's leaving free agency. So there's really no discount to be had. So why bother, right? Like, why bother acquiring now? So that is a post-NFL draft on the clock Lenny Fournette pickup. And if someone's going to tell me it's now or never, just let him go. He's not going to change your team that much anyway.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments of both of you guys, what you said there. I think Fournette was outstanding for Tampa in the playoffs. This sample size, if you work it out over the full season, he would have been at the RB4 pace, which is pretty crazy. Flip side is in the regular season, it was at 10.15 fantasy points per game, which is nothing special really. He did seem more motivated on a contender when the Bucs were actually in a position to win games and picking up that pace towards the end of the season. So I do still think there is motivation issues there for Fournette. Tampa makes most sense to me too. I think it's the logical fit. It's the spot where he's got the best chance to see the most volume. But yeah, I'm pretty cool on Fournette. If I can move off him, I'd love to do it at cost. So question for Mike. It was poor in the 2020 regular season, was Lenny? And he played like a Hall of Famer in the playoffs. What sort of season would you expect in 2021 with the current running back committee in Tampa?
Not much, to be honest. I mean, realistically, it's funny how it's not really a Tampa team anymore, right? It's a Brady offense. And how frustrating have running backs been in Brady's offense? You're talking about hot hands, and Arians also is one of those coaches who has this very strange way of handling adults by like grounding them, right? Like you'll see Jones fumble the ball, and all of a sudden you won't see him for 2 games. It's like he's been, put him back in a timeout for whatever reason. It's the strangest thing I've ever seen. But realistically, when you look at the running backs on that team, I just don't see immense value there. I'm a Ronald Jones guy. I think he's a very good running back. So I like Rojo personally. I just don't think he'll get the touches to show it. I think honestly, you're looking at high end of like 80 yards and a touchdown from one of the guys if you pick right. But it's a huge risk. I mean, because you don't know who's going to be the right guy. I would have expected if Fournette didn't ball out in the playoffs, I would have expected Rojo to lead a committee. I would have expected Keyshawn Vaughn to be the change of pace back. I think they were set up properly for that. And if Fournette goes into free agency, I think that's what it'll be. And Ronald Jones, I'd say probably a low-end RB2. I mean, he's got some value there, unless Vaughn's better than we thought. I don't think he is. But if he turns out to be, that could be a problem for Rojo. I just think, though, realistically, this is going to be a Brady offense for as long as that arm is attached. And that's just not a team I want to be invested heavily in a running back, especially in the starting running back position.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I think they're both just going to kill each other's value, aren't they? Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. We saw it all this season. So, yeah, I fully agree that going into next season, I can't see that changing even after what we've seen from Fournette in the playoffs. I don't think that changes anything.
I'm just gutted he came to Tampa, to be honest, because I think Ronald Jones, honestly, he'd have been a low-end RB1. I think he'd have been there if Leonard Fournette wasn't there. It's just, I mean, if that would have happened, stop the world, because I'd have been getting off that.
You're unbearable now, Kevin, and it's been screwed over. So I can't even imagine what it'd be like if Ronald Jones had that back to himself.
I'd be changing my name by default. I think it'd be to Ronald Jones. Well, my name's already the same as a former NFL player, in it, so yeah, we just have to smash it. So we're going to now move on to look at the wide receivers. All
right, so Kev, just 1 second, because we have the biggest Bills fan in the chat, and I promised him, I know we're not going to talk about this guy, but Dave, you're getting Chris Carson. You're going to be fine. So yeah, let's do wide receivers.
Yeah, we love Rashad Penny on the show, don't we? So
we had to cut that bit. We had to cut that bit off.
That's fair. That's fair. Just wanted to make sure I gave Dave his running back. I know he was waiting.
Awesome, Mike. So yeah, the wide receiver free agency pool is outstanding, with several quality contributors hitting free agency this offseason. I mean, there's loads of outstanding guys to go through, but we'll pick out your best one first, Mike. Who's your first wide receiver you'd like to discuss their dream landing spot, please?
Well, it's Chris Godwin. I think that's the first domino to fall for all of us. This is a guy who we were looking at as arguably, the wide receiver one. I think he was going to like wide receiver 4 in the preseason after what he did. Now, I talked about this extensively. Why did Chris Godwin have a little bit of a down season? I was on with Chase and Mike and Gabby the other day, and Chris Godwin and Tom Brady are just not a fit. Chris Godwin is a guy who gets open through athleticism. He's not a precise route runner, and Brady's a 3 to 5 step drop in release. He's putting a ball at a spot, not on a player. So what you see is that with Godwin, if he's taking the route 1 or 2 yards deeper to create that separation, Brady's skipping the ball to him because Brady's throwing a 7-yard in cut. It doesn't matter where Godwin is. Brady's looking the other way to pull the safety, coming back, and boom, the ball's out. He doesn't have the athleticism to extend the play. So what you had was really a mismatch. And what you saw was come crunch time, you were looking at Evans and Gronkowski, guys that Brady knew were going to be in their spot, as opposed to someone who's better with this athleticism, and Chris Godwin. And that's why where I want to send him to, and I did put anywhere but the Giants, please do not send that man to the Giants. So I'm going to go with the Indianapolis Colts as the best landing spot for Chris Godwin. Yeah, Frank Reich's offense. You have Carson Wentz. And let's be honest, as much as Twitter wanted to talk about the Carson Wentz trade, those are still premium picks that went for Carson Wentz. They still invested in him. And they didn't invest in him to give him Michael Pittman and Trey Burton. They just didn't. They have to give him a weapon. In that offense, at his style, Wentz's style, his ability to extend the play, Wentz still does have a very good floor with his legs. I think he's a perfect pairing for Chris Godwin. He'd be a target monster. I absolutely love it. I think that Hilton's on his way out of the town. I think you put in Chris Godwin. That's going to help Wentz take off in that high-powered offense. I think Godwin will be an absolute star again. And I think we're right back to talking about him in that high-end wide receiver 1 category if he lands there. I have him right now in my rankings. I want to say 12. And it would be a big boost to him if I saw him in Indianapolis. Obviously, the ranking has to take into account some of the uncertainty where he could land with a New York Giants. He could land hypothetically with the Philadelphia Eagles and Jalen Hurts. Like there's places he could land that realistically 12's too high. Indy's not one of those places. If he lands in Indy, he rockets up the board immediately.
Yeah, I fully agree with obviously we know that Godwin had a down year as a wide receiver 31, but I fully agree. Indy's it's one of the ideal spots. I believe they've got the cap space to make a move like this happen. Obviously, they've just signed Wentz and they're having to pay his contract, but I still believe they've got plenty of cap room. So I can fully see them going after a star wide receiver to put alongside Wentz. And yeah, he become the top guy straight away. Obviously, you mentioned T.Y. Hilton. I believe he's on his way out. So he's going to go straight into being that alpha and that number 1 target in Indy. And I just think it'd be a huge boost for the entire offense, if I'm honest. And it could elevate all the players. Obviously, Wentz, I think it'd be great for him. Jonathan Taylor opens a bit more space for him as well to operate. So yeah, it'd be a brilliant landing spot. I did have a look at your rankings, Mike, and you did have him as the wide receiver 12, and he's right between 2 guys that I know you're super high on as well, DJ Moore, who we mentioned earlier, and T. Higgins. So if you did land on the Colts, are you taking him over both those guys now then?
No. Nope. So I'm still keeping DJ Moore ahead of him with the hope that Watson or Jameis ends up in Carolina. I think that realistically, I like DJ Moore with Watson or Jameis more than I like Chris Godwin with Wentz. However, if you want to get more realistic here, I am probably moving him up to wide receiver 8, which would put him over Calvin Ridley, CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin, and Stephon Diggs. That's the level where I'd be really comfortable with them. Now, yes, if Teddy Bridgewater stays in Carolina, you can get me to say, yeah, I'd go Chris Godwin over DJ Moore if Teddy were to be the quarterback in Carolina. I don't think that's going to happen. However, if that happened, yeah, then we'd be pushing up to like wide receiver 6. And that's about as high as he's going to get, because when you look at that really high end wide receiver tier 1, Adams, Hill, Metcalf, Hopkins, Jefferson, and AJ Brown, I don't care what happens this offseason. Nobody's breaking into that tier. That is like the elite of the elite. They have, the body type, they have the offense, they have the quarterback, like everything about that grouping, with the exception of potentially Aaron Rodgers leaving town and Jordan Love being the quarterback. There's nothing I could see happening this offseason to break into that tier, but Chris Godwin would be slated right underneath them with DJ Moore, depending on who the quarterback is in Carolina. There's some flip-flopping happening.
Kev just dropping out for a second there. Yeah, fully agree, Mike, with everything you've just said. Kev, what have you got any feelings on Godwin?
Yeah, sorry I nipped out then. Yeah, Godwin's my dynasty wide receiver. My favourite dynasty wide receiver that's a free agent this year. He does it all, doesn't he? He's got the yards to catch. He's efficient. He wins outside, he wins inside, deep, and he also scores touchdowns. So he is a complete wide receiver. And he did flash that immense upside you mentioned in 2019. 2020 was a little bit different. He missed those 4 games through injury, but I do feel that wide receiver 12, it feels like an overreaction to me. I think Mike's absolutely nailed this landing spot as well. Colts would be absolutely perfect for Chris Godwin. So just want to get Mike's take on this. If Godwin does land with the Colts in his dream spot, will he be able to repeat that wide receiver 2 overall finish he had in 2019 in any season for the rest of his career?
I mean, in any season, sure, it's definitely a possibility. It's going to be difficult, right? When you look at who's up in that grouping, the best chance that you have, in all honesty, saving for injury, which we're never going to cheer for, and honestly, if people tell you they can predict injuries, please stop following them. They have no idea what they're talking about. So realistically, the thing that could get Chris Godwin there is age at some of the top end, which is Adams, Hill, and DeAndre Hopkins, right? So you have age there. The uncertainty with Russell Wilson could cause some churn with DK Metcalf. I just don't see Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown. I think they're going to be staples for a long time coming. So I think you'd really need a shift in that upper echelon for him to get up to that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 overall range. And I just don't know that Wentz is the guy who's going to support that if he ends up in Indianapolis. Because when you look at really just going down the list, like look at the guys who are the quarterbacks of these number ones. Aaron Rodgers. There's no competition. Pat Mahomes. I mean, we don't even really have to talk about that. Tyreek Hill is probably only going to go up with the aging Travis Kelce. I think we might be looking at his floor, which is scary. Like we talked about Russell Wilson, if DK Metcalf stays, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins being tied at the hip, Kirk Cousins, the underrated quarterback in the NFL, and then Ryan Tannehill, who might be second most underrated quarterback in the NFL. These guys fit in their scheme so well that I don't know that Godwin launches up. And Kev, to your point, is 12 an overreaction? I mean, absolutely. You're looking at the toughest thing with rankings is not being able to show tiers, right? And when you look at 8 to 12 for me, which is Ridley, Lamb, McLaurin, Diggs, and Godwin, I'm talking about razor thin. You give me this guy plus probably a third, and I'll take it. Take Godwin plus a third for any of those guys. Ridley, who's my wide receiver 8, like you're talking razor thin coin flip. I could see him ending up anywhere in that tier very easily. So do I think wide receiver 8 is in the range of possibilities? 100%, which because of injury could vault him into that wide receiver 6 range, because you could have 2 people have circumstances out of their control. But I think that's about his ceiling. I just don't see wide receiver 2. I think what we were hoping for was projecting a gunslinging quarterback, which Wentz is not. We were projecting Jameis Winston and Chris Godwin, plus people I think were wildly underrating Mike Evans. I think that was a big problem with that ranking as well. So I never bought into that, and I still don't.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that when you see a ranking, you just sort of that really gets people irritated. And you're right, when you're thinking in tiers, that tier could be massive. It could be from like 6 to 20, and it's pretty interchangeable. But you make a great point. Godwin could be a great fit on one of your teams, depending how the rest of it looks, and maybe not so much on another. So, yeah, tip to anybody playing Dynasty is just to tier out your positions rather than focus on this person is better than this person, because the situation can sort of change your decision.
Yep.
Right, next wide receiver. Who you got, Mike?
Oh, so this one I cheated on. I absolutely cheated on this one. My next wide receiver is Allen Robinson. And with the exception of the Carolina Panthers, Allen Robinson's dream landing spot is wherever Deshaun Watson goes. Now, any of you who follow me knows that I've been calling Deshaun Watson to the Jets since early January. At this point, I was on P2W Fantasy. I said he's going to the Jets for 2 firsts and Sam Darnold. I am holding that firm. I think that's where he lands. But wherever he goes, be it to the Jets, to Miami, I don't think he ever ends up going to the Chicago Bears. But if Watson goes to the Bears, we put him there too. Realistically, the only team that I don't see spending the money to get Allen Robinson to pair with Deshaun Watson because of the weapons they have is the Carolina Panthers. So let's just play out the argument and say to the Jets, we're looking at Watson, Allen Robinson, Denzel Mims, the potential re-signing of Jamison Crowder, and then obviously if you could ever keep him on the field, Chris Herndon. That's a really nice set of weapons for Watson, but it's not talented enough that you wouldn't see a massive target share for Robinson. And I think that's who he is. Allen Robinson, as far as an NFL wide receiver goes, is one of the tops in the league. He is so wildly underrated, great route running, arrogant hands. This guy legitimately is an alpha wide receiver, no matter what people want to rank him in the fantasy community. So I think I want to see him in a place where he's not competing for targets. I want him to be that target hog because he can beat bracket coverage. He can beat that cornerback one. Like, he is a guy that I'm not worried about needing pressure off from, like you may for a Juju Smith-Schuster is a perfect example. Juju Smith-Schuster is not going to perform in wide receiver one coverage. We've seen that. Allen Robinson will. He has his whole career. He's been the only guy on every team he's been on, and all he does is produce. For some reason, he's like the Derek Carr of wide receivers. For some reason, he finishes in the top 12 every year and gets drafted 18th. It makes no sense. I don't even know how to explain the bias against Allen Robinson, but even on the Jets, which the reason I would love it is two reasons. Number one, I think he would explode. Number two, you can bet your bottom dollar you would get that man for a significant discount because people look at laundry and make decisions, which is horrific. New coach, new quarterback, new scheme. Forget about it. They're not the Jets you remember. He would be a wide receiver one. I think he'd be huge in that Jets offense, and that's where I'm putting him and Deshaun Watson. I'm going to be very happy with both of them landing there.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said about Robinson, Mike. He is disrespected constantly by the fantasy community. He's had back-to-back wide receiver one finishes, and that's given the fact that he's played with Trubisky and Nick Foles. I mean, if he can do it with guys Blake Bortles, if he can do it with guys like that, then just imagine what he can do with somebody like Deshaun Watson. You mentioned that the Jets, they are a team that have got plenty of needs. They're obviously in a bit of a rebuild at the moment. They had a bottom third defense in 2020, so that could then lead to more opportunities for Robinson. Obviously, they're going to have to pass more to keep in games and play catch up all the time. So that just adds to the excitement of Robinson landing somewhere like the Jets. And as I say, just that improved quarterback play, the sky's honestly the limit for somebody like Robinson. We've seen what he can do. And yeah, if he's with Watson, then we could be talking about a wide receiver one, the wide receiver one, not just a wide receiver one. So yeah, how much better do you think Robinson can be? Given obviously that he's had those back-to-back wide receiver one seasons with the Bears, and he finished the wide receiver 7 and wide receiver 9. How much better than that do you think he could be the wide receiver one?
Wide receiver one, no. However, I would say that realistically, a lot of what we talked about for Chris Godwin applies to Allen Robinson if this were to be the situation he landed into. And to be quite honest, you might see me ranking Robinson ahead of Godwin if these two situations play out. It's going to be very close for me. So you're talking about a guy who really just short of that elite tier that we were talking about, just short of it because of he's not that game breaker. The difference between Robinson and when we talk about like an A.J. Brown or a Tyreek Hill is even those off games. Yeah. They turn it around with that one play, that 190-yarder. That's not Robinson's game. That's just not how he plays. So I think to reach that level, you need that level of explosiveness, or you need the usage that you see from Devontae Adams. You need to know he's the first look across the board. So when I put it together, Allen Robinson, Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore, and Chris Godwin in the scenario that we're playing out right here really make up that tier 2 for me, ahead of Lamb, who's going to be competing at the very least with Michael Gallup, possibly with Amari Cooper, ahead of Terry McLaurin, because as we're playing out our scenarios, Washington is left out of the musical chairs game of quarterback and probably bringing up a rookie. So that would put him ahead of that guy as well, ahead of Stephon Diggs, who I know had a great year. Another very underrated guy. But I think what you saw when you look at the jump from Josh Allen, what he did, how much he changed, I think that's going to be tough to repeat. I think you may have seen ceiling for Diggs on Buffalo, which is great. Don't get me wrong. He's still an outstanding player. But I think those 4 players all of a sudden turn into that tier 2 for me, and a very, very solid tier 2. Regardless of age of Robinson, I don't want to hear about that. He's still, 27? You could get a good 5 years out of him. Let's face it, Allen Robinson will be a wide receiver 1, most likely longer than your league is together. So relax on the age thing. So that's where I'm putting him right now. And like I said, Diggs is a guy I think maybe also goes into that tier as a possibility of that group as we shake it up and talk about it. But that would be your tier 2 for me.
Yeah, I think Allen Robinson is perennially underrated in dynasties. I consider him bulletproof, actually, where He's been a wide receiver one 3 different times, and that's despite the QBs that's been surrounding him, like Matt mentioned. I think that's why, as appealing it would be to match him up with Watson and have him tied there, I don't actually think it's essential for him to be a high-end dynasty wide receiver still. Plus, I am a huge Denzel Mims fan, so him ending up with the Jets would it'd crush me a little bit, because I want all the balls to go to Mims next year. My pick for Robinson actually would be the Lions, and I think the key for me is volume, that he's been top 3 in targets the last 2 years, and also that wide receiver room is completely wide open at the moment. I think you covered the Robinson going to the Jets really nicely then, Mike. So I'm going to actually ask a different question to what I had planned initially, and just get your take on if Robinson was to end up on the Lions and Golladay moves away, how would that affect him? Would he be sort of on that wide receiver one cusp for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. The reason I didn't have his dream landing spot you covered, which is I think Golladay goes back. So obviously if Golladay is there, that becomes a major problem. It would be great for Goff. And he has supported 2 low-end wide receiver ones in the past, as we've seen with Kupp and Woods. However, it would absolutely cap his upside, whereas that wide receiver 12 is about where we'd be looking at for him. Reason being is that the red zone touches that Golladay is going to get would definitely depress his value. Now, if he's all alone in Detroit, I think everything, Kev, that we covered about the Jets falls into place. As much as we want to talk about Goff, we all hate Goff. We all hate Goff. How you feeling about Robert Woods? Because Allen Robinson is twice the player Robert Woods is. No disrespect. I love you, Bobby, but let's just be real here. It's Allen Robinson. So you're talking about Allen Robinson with TJ Hawkinson basically playing the Kupp role, if you will, that slot receiver who's going to get that underneath volume. Allen Robinson getting every look from the outside. Yeah, I would say you're looking almost exactly what we talked about with the Jets. And the reason why I would say it's exactly the same is when you look at Watson, is he a better quarterback? Yes. But Watson also does so much with his legs that Goff doesn't do, that I think that kind of balances them out for Allen Robinson, if that makes sense. Like a lot of what targets Robinson might lose with Watson improvising and turning it into a run, Goff's going to be throwing that ball. So I think what you might see is a slight uptick in targets, let's say maybe 15 to 20, maybe even 25 over the course of a year from a slightly less efficient quarterback. That really plays out when you put out the projections. That plays out to almost match up exact when you look at the numbers. So I would say Detroit without Golladay and Jets with Watson both play out to really sell really nicely for Allen Robinson being that wide receiver 7-8 in Dynasty. I would have the exact same reaction I did to the Jets.
Smashing him. We'll just come to Matt to wrap it up on Robinson. What is your ideal landing spot for him?
I think, like Mike said, you want him to be anywhere where he's going to be that league guy. As you said, the Jets is a great spot, even if it isn't with Deshaun Watson. I think they're going to get an improved quarterback, so somebody like the Jets is good. Also with the Lions as well, as you mentioned, having that uncertainty at the wide receiver position, it's definitely going to be an advantage to somebody like Robinson. And Mike's he hit the nail on the head with it all, really. That he's a player that he needs volume. He's not going to have those massive plays like somebody like Tyreek Hill has that he mentioned. He's just somebody that he needs that constant volume. But you just know that when you're going to throw him the ball, he's going to catch it. So as long as he's on a team that's going to throw him the ball, then it's a fine landing spot.
Indeed it is. It feels like he's been around forever as well, because he came in quite young, didn't he? So
yeah,
27 is still early.
Absolutely.
And speaking of receivers that came into the NFL at a young age, we've got Mike's next free agent wide receiver.
Yeah, so next up is Juju Smith-Schuster. This is not a guy I am a huge fan of. So I think we've now officially left the wide receiver one tier, as we're not going to be covering Golladay, who's the only one left in that group. So now we're getting to those kind of wide receiver twos. So when you look at Juju Smith-Schuster, I'm going to have the almost exact opposite take that I had with Allen Robinson. I do not want him going to an empty wide receiver room. So forget the Jets, forget Detroit. That's a bad fit for this guy. He's just not that dude. He is a second option, but a very, very good one. like the top second option. So my dream landing spot for him is the Green Bay Packers. I don't think this is going to happen. I just want to be 100% clear. I am not predicting him to the Packers. The Packers do not value wide receivers. They've showed you that time and time again. So while I don't think they're going to pay for Juju Smith-Schuster, when you look at what he's going from a Hall of Fame, borderline Hall of Fame quarterback to a guaranteed Hall of Fame quarterback, when you look at going from when he thrived with Antonio Brown to Devontae Adams, honestly, it's about a carbon copy of the offense that he thrived in 2019. And that's what we want to get him back to. We don't want him to be keyed on. We don't want him to be a volume guy. He's a guy who you want to see. He's like a 1A or a wide receiver 1.5, however you want to term it. Not good enough to beat wide receiver 1 coverage, but too good for the off cornerback. And that's where he becomes a nightmare, right? He's almost like those stud tight ends, right? Where you just can't cover him if there's somebody taking out that shutdown cornerback. So if you get those big play cornerbacks off of him and get him more to that second tier, that's where he's going to thrive. I think Green Bay would be the perfect landing spot for him because you're going to have an accurate quarterback. You're going to have a great place. That would be just about perfect. So Juju, out of all of the free agent wide receivers, he is going to fluctuate the most based on landing spot. If he goes somewhere where they expect him to be a wide receiver 1, move him. Sell. I'm out. If you see him on the Giants, if you see him on the Jets, if you see him on the Lions, gone. Forget about it. I'm done. If you see him go back to Pittsburgh, I'm out. However, if he goes to a place where he's not getting that level of coverage, then I am back in on Juju, where I think people might drop off from him. I'm back into the point where people are like, well, now I don't want Juju because Adams is there. Forget about it. I am all in on that landing spot. So that would be what I'm looking for, which is kind of like a zig when they zag type thing. And like we talked about, the exact opposite of Allen Robinson, the exact opposite of what you would expect from Kenny Golladay, the exact opposite of what you're hoping for from any of the true wide receiver ones. We talked about Chris Godwin as well. Juju's the opposite. I want somebody better than him on that team. I want somebody taking the pressure off of him, someone who's taking the top off the defense, and then he's gold. Green Bay, Kansas City Chiefs, those are the teams that really he would thrive on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree that Green Bay, if we are judging Juju as a wide receiver too, Green Bay is the spot that we all talk about for a player like that, Corey Davis, Will Fuller, with players that have been mentioned and linked to the Packers, and Juju fits that spot perfectly. Somebody that obviously Devontae Adams can take a lot of the attention away from Juju, and then we can see Juju thrive as that second option. He did make the slow start to the season last season, but he did finish as the wide receiver 17, and he actually had a really strong finish to the end of the season. He was the wide receiver 9 through from week 7 onwards. So even though he had a tough start, he did manage to turn that around, and it looked pretty good. To be fair, you mentioned that you wouldn't be too keen on him staying at the Steelers, but I'm a big fan of Deontay Johnson. Obviously, Chase Claypool's there as well. Maybe they are going to start taking a bit of the attention away from somebody like Juju, and Juju could still be a great asset for the Steelers. But yeah, Kev mentioned it at the start. It's easy to forget he's still only 24 years old, so still plenty of years left in Juju. And yeah, I think he can still be a great dynasty asset. And I'm just like you, I'm going to start buying into it. And if he does end up somewhere like this where he's more under the second option, and there's a standout wide receiver 1 and it's not Juju, and people are going to be worried about that, then I'm taking full advantage of that, and I'm grabbing him everywhere I can. The only one concern I would have in Green Bay is that Juju tends to be quite a red zone target for Big Ben. Obviously, if he ended up at the Packers, we know how much Rodgers loves. Yeah, exactly. We know how much Rodgers loves Devontae Adams. So that would be my only slight knock on that landing spot. I'd imagine that Juju saw a little less attention in the red zone. But overall, yeah, I think it's a great spot. As I say, I've been studying your rankings, Mike. You have him as the wide receiver 20. How much further would he jump if he did land in Green Bay?
Oh, man, yeah. If he landed in Green Bay, realistically, again, we're kind of splitting hairs when you talk about that next tier of wide receivers. So when you look at Juju Smith-Schuster, where I have him right now, the problem is so many guys in that tier could increase in value. We already talked about Allen Robinson and Kenny Golladay being ahead of him, right, at 16 and 17. So this becomes a package deal. Like you want to say, well, if Juju goes to Green Bay, maybe he jumps over those guys. But then once Allen Robinson lands in one of the spots we talked about, he shoots back down, right? I'm pretty keen on where I have him ranked here. I actually ranked him as a guy who I think is going to land in a decent spot. There is no way he's getting above T. Higgins at 14. Maybe Mike Evans at 15. Maybe Amari Cooper at 18, depending on how the season shakes out. But the guys I have above him right now, Mike Evans, Kenny Golladay, Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper, and Keenan Allen. Honestly, I don't know a landing spot that jumps him up very much. So I think I actually baked in a decent landing spot for him in that ranking. I'm not sure that it's going to shift much. What I think will happen is people's value around me will shift, which is going to present that opportunity to acquire him. That's what I think is going to happen is I'm going to have him at wide receiver 20. And like you talked about, people that have him at wide receiver 15, see him go to Green Bay and get scared of Devontae Adams. That's where I see those people potentially dropping him more to 25. And now all of a sudden we have a match. But I'm looking at it now, I'd be pretty shocked if I moved him up very much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for any guy tied to Aaron Rodgers. I think he's such a fine quarterback. He's so efficient. He led the league in touchdowns and he was 7th in pass yards. That's despite being 27th in pass plays last season. A bit like you, Mike. The community hates Juju's 8.6 yards per catch in 2020. That was 104th in the NFL. But I do think that's more to do with Big Ben and the Pittsburgh offense. We saw in 2017 to 2019 that Juju was a yards after the catch weapon in the NFL. And coming back to your Packer selection, I love it. It's a great spot. I could totally see that happening. I do slightly prefer the Dolphins because I worry how much volume he'd get with Devontae Adams there. I do think he needs volume, but the Packers is a fine selection for me as well. So I just want to get your view on this. If it does end up in Green Bay, your dream landing spot, how do you think that would affect Devontae Adams as dynasty value? Would he move in your rankings away from your wide receiver one or not?
Yeah, it would be a little bit of a hit. So right now I have him at number 1. So I guess the only place he could go is down, right? So honestly, the guy that I'm least comfortable with the ranking right now is A.J. Brown. I have it number 6. And when you look at the reports of injury, if Juju were to go to Green Bay, I could see a shift. Tyreek goes up to number 1 in that scenario. If Wilson were to stay in Seattle, DK Metcalf could move up to 2. I still would have Adams over Hopkins and Jefferson, but there's the potential that I would do a big flip and go A.J. Brown up to number 3 and Adams 4. That's the shift I could see. I really have to take another look at A.J. Brown, figure out how I value in his injury, because he had to talk about his surgery, I want to say 2 or 3 days after I did this round of rankings. So he's a guy I could see moving up. However, Hopkins and Jefferson are still guys that I don't see I could put over Devontae Adams even with Juju there. So you're talking about a floor of wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. I'm a huge Devontae Adams guy. And even then, it'd be hard for me to go much further than even 2 behind Tyreek Hill. That's the only guy I will guarantee you. If Juju Smith-Schuster goes to the Packers, the only receiver I could say I would guarantee goes ahead of Devontae Adams in that scenario is Tyreek.
Yeah, agreed. I think Tyreek, he still gets a bit of a bad rep in the community. I think there's a lot of fantasy players that don't have him in that top couple. It just blows your mind. Like you said, when Kels goes as well, that's going to add to his value even further, tied to Pat Mahomes. So
I just think that I'll just touch on that. I think the one thing that a lot of people are concerned with Hill is obviously how he's off the field. I think we had that scenario, didn't we, a couple of years ago when we were looking at him potentially being out of the league. And I just think that still plays on people's mind, whether they're right for doing that or not, that's up to them. But yeah, I fully agree as a talent and an NFL player, he's definitely right up there and arguably the wide receiver one.
Yeah, we're going from Tyreek Hill, who's a fast wide receiver with some off the field issues, to another fast wide receiver with off the field issues. Mike, who's your next selection, please?
Will Fuller. So Will Fuller, he has to go to a place where he has a quarterback who will air it out and a pharmacist who can keep him healthy from what we saw this year. So those are the 2 things we're looking for. The team that I put him in, again, I like to cheat a little bit in these. Put Will Fuller and Jameis Winston together for the least efficient, most exciting offense you'll ever see in your entire life. So I want him with an air-it-out quarterback. I want him with someone who's going to be a little reckless with the ball, and that is Jameis Winston. And Will Fuller, realistically, is that guy. He is the closest thing we've seen to old school Deshaun Jackson, that really crazy box score of 3 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Every time he touches the ball, the guy is a threat to take it to the house. Problem is, every time he touches the ball, he at least tweaks a hamstring, if not full-blown pulls it. So that's really where our issue is. Where I decided to put these two on a team, because like I said, I mean, Jameis to Carolina would be his dream spot. However, now we're talking Will Fuller, so I have to flip the script a little bit and do a remix for you. Jameis Winston and Will Fuller to the Chicago Bears would be outstanding. Would be absolutely outstanding. It would be reckless. It would be really bad for the Bears as a whole, so I apologize to all the Bears fans that I'm calling this one out. However, if they went Jameis and Will Fuller and Allen Robinson were to leave town, as we've talked about, to go with Watson, Fuller just getting balls heaved to him downfield every 3rd and 12 with Jameis probably having his eyes closed half the time would be fantasy gold for Will Fuller. That would be absolutely outstanding. So that's where I'm going to put him as my dream spot. Realistically, though, he needs to be with a downfield thrower, and he needs to be with somebody who has a little bit of gunslinger to him. When you're talking historically, man, Will Fuller and Brett Favre would have been something. Like, they would have been the perfect pairing. But so for me, Chicago Bears, Jameis Winston, Will Fuller, wheels up on Fuller. That moves him up a ton.
Yeah, I fully agree with you again, Mike. It's just what we need for Will Fuller, somebody that can just air it out and let Fuller do what he does best. There's no arguing against the talent he has. He's an unbelievable talent. It's just, as you say, it's the injuries that are the problem when it comes to Fuller. He never finished higher than wide receiver 53 before last season, so that's all down to the fact that he just couldn't stay on the field, and it was affecting his fantasy performance. Obviously, we know last season it was looking great, but he got that ban for the performance-enhancing drug. So obviously, we know that there was a little something secret that were keeping him on the field, and yeah, he did manage to show just what he can do when he's healthy. So. I mentioned earlier just what James can do when he's a quarterback for his wide receivers and how much he can elevate them in terms of fantasy. And as you say, if these two land together, wow, I mean, it's going to be exciting for fantasy. Maybe not so much if you're a Bears fan, you're probably going to be watching with your eyes closed and don't really want to see it. But from fantasy, we'd be loving life, and it'd be great to see. Yeah, as I mentioned, Fuller, he was on pace with the wide receiver 6 in 2020 before that ban. So do you think he could actually put up those kind of numbers, finish as a wide receiver 1 if he did land in a situation like that?
If he stays healthy, absolutely. When you look at his per game numbers, like you talked about, he's never finished higher than wide receiver 42. But I also don't think per game, and I'd have to look at these numbers. I'm just pulling these out of my backside at this point. I don't know that he's ever actually finished per game lower than like wide receiver 15. Yeah. I mean, he's that type of player that when he's playing, I mean, you saw him have a 5-touchdown game. You see him have these massive games. When you look at Will Fuller per game, he is a wide receiver 1. Yeah. It's what he is. The problem is he plays 8 games, and that takes you from wide receiver 12 to wide receiver 50 real quick. I mean, he's not that good that he can carry that level of numbers. So, yeah, I think a healthy Will Fuller is always a threat to be a wide receiver 1. He's just never healthy. And as much as I don't like the term injury prone, there is certainly a pattern of missed games here that concern me. There's certainly something soft tissue wise that is causing this, that until, and I'm no doctor, far from it. I did go to college for 7 years, but that was more of a drinker than a studier. However, when you look at it, it's that's the problem, is that unless someone could come out and tell me they figured out what was wrong with Will Fuller and they fixed it, I can never value him as a wide receiver 1 because of that. But per game, absolutely, he has the highest ceiling possibly of any wide receiver in football, save for those top 5.
Yeah, I'm a huge Fuller fan before last season. I love these weekly upside, like you mentioned just then, Mike, and the talent as well. But On the back of a strong 2020, I'm happy to sell him now. I do think wide receiver 41 in startups does feel a smidgen too low, but like you said, Winston would be a great fit for Fuller with the the downfield passing ability he's got. I did actually find it quite tricky to pick a standout landing spot for Fuller, but the one I opted for was Arizona with linking up with Nuke Hopkins again and a legit wide receiver too for Kyler Murray, but I do think moving away from Deshaun Watson will be a tough scene for him wherever he goes. So, with it likely that Fuller's playing with a lesser QB than the elite Deshaun Watson, does this mean that his dynasty value reduces no matter where he ends up? Or do you think it just matters how good the special sauce is on his?
It really, the pharmacy matters more than anything. And then honestly, like getting away from Watson, but potentially getting into volume. Like I heard a lot of talk about Will Fuller finally being the wide receiver 1 in Houston. I couldn't disagree more. Brandon Cooks is a better player. You guys can quote that if you want. That's not even something I'm putting as a question mark statement.
I'm on board with it, Mike.
It seems simple, right? Excuse me. But when you look at the way, when you look at the way that I value Will Fuller, I'll give you a perfect example. I'm in a super flex league, and someone just offered me Will Fuller for Michael Gallup and Mitch Trubisky, and I said no. I'm not even sure he's better than Gallup at this point. He is a much higher upside play than Michael Gallup, but he can't stay on the field. And I think Gallup without Cooper potentially being in Dallas, whether it's this year or next, makes a huge difference for Michael Gallup. So overall, Will Fuller to me is valued properly as a guy who I don't tend to play that way. Now, when you talk to Mike Lee, who mic'd me up, he loves those guys. Like he goes for those, give me the weeks you're going to win, knowing I'm not going to get you for 16. I think he probably plays in more challenging leagues than I do because I play for weeks 14 to 16 to be arrogant because I'm used to being there. So it's kind of that simple, and Fuller never makes it there with me. So he's not a guy I'm investing in. However, he's definitely a guy that I miss out on a lot because when he's on the field, you wish you had him. When he's on the field, there aren't, as we talked about, there aren't many better. The landing spot will make a difference, but not having a Brandon Cooks there, like we talked about with Chicago, would also make a difference because instead of getting those 4 to 5 shots a game, you might get 7. And with his inefficiency, I think that'll be big when we talk about, and that's Jameis's inefficiency. Will Fuller is very efficient, actually. But with Jameis's inefficiency, you're more likely to hit one. That could be a coin flip for me. So I think his value could stay stable, but it could drop like a stone if he goes somewhere where they're not willing to air it out. Like if you ever put Will Fuller, for example, with Teddy Bridgewater, forget about it. I didn't even want him on he could be on the free agent wire. I don't think I'd pick him up, right? So I think his value is either stable or down from here, but I do think he could retain value based on situation.
Yeah, I think Fuller for me is one that I call him like my rental because I'll grab him every offseason when people are down in them. When he has those few big weeks during the season, I'm moving him on. I mean, I've done it in a league that me and Kevin and I got Jerry Jeudy in a couple of 22 seconds for him. And that's after he's had a couple of big games. So it's just the ideal rental. Now his value's gone back down. Grab him again. And obviously we don't know the landing spot, but if he does land in a great spot and he starts hot, then move him on and you're making profit every year. I love it.
Yeah, I just can't believe you say you're in bad leagues, Mike. I'm in a league where I feel like you've dissed me there.
I made the playoffs in that league, if I remember correctly. And I got someone to give me Pat Mahomes for Justin Herbert. So, yeah. There can always be good players, but I think I might have that league locked at this point.
Yeah, you've got a pretty strong team. You just need that Kittle in your side to put you over top, I think.
You can have Laviska Shenault. I hear Twitter's really big.
Smashing. So we'll come on to the last wide receiver we'll be discussing in this section. So who you got, Mike?
Yeah, so the last one, obviously, is last but not least. He's the last of the wide receiver ones, Kenny Golladay. He shouldn't go anywhere. We've talked about a few guys like this, Leonard Fournette being one of them. Kenny Golladay is best suited in Detroit. He's best suited with Jared Goff. Honestly, just take everything I said about Allen Robinson and apply it to Kenny Golladay. They're a little bit of a different player. However, they do thrive off the same type of system. Target hogs, red zone touches. Kenny Galladay is a big boy. And if he ends up getting his hip right, people are going to remember Kenny Galladay and Cortland Sutton were taking over the league before they got hurt. If they get right, people are going to regret sleeping on these guys. These are right back up to Kenny Galladay in particular for me. Kenny Galladay is dang close to an A.J. Brown type of wide receiver when he's healthy. And we always like the shiny new object. He's that guy. If you could promise health, he's up in that tier for me. He's that good. He's that dude. And Detroit gives him the best chance of target. So I am all in on him being smart, staying with Detroit, and reaping the benefits. So that's the dream landing spots is his existing team.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Kenny Galladay as well. Obviously, we know he had that down season last year because of the injuries, but he averaged 16.45 fantasy points per game in those 4 games that he did play. So that just shows what kind of big playability he's got. He finishes as a wide receiver 9 in 2019. He's averaged 16.8 yards per catch in his career. So just all things that point towards him being a fantastic wide receiver and one of the best in the league when he is healthy, as you say, Mike. He's just a legit wide receiver one. I think at the minute people are down on him, obviously because of the injuries that have occurred and what have you this year. But I think now he's becoming an absolute value. I've seen him, his ADP's dropped right down. He's probably around wide receiver 18-20 mark in ADP. And I just think that's crazy considering the upside that he has. You mentioned him staying on the Lions. Obviously, we know that he's going to get the downgrade at quarterback going from Stafford to Goff. But as we mentioned earlier, Goff's managed to support Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp as well. So we know he can support those wide receivers. So I just want to know what your feelings is, Mike. Obviously, we know the Lions, they do seem to be heading towards a bit of a rebuild over at Detroit. Do you think that works in Galladay's favour? Obviously, he's got the lack of competition and they're probably going to be chasing games a lot more now with how poor the defense is looking. Or do you think it works against him? Obviously, he's got no support. We've mentioned that the quarterback play that he's going to have getting Jared Goff over Matt Stafford. How do you think that affects his fantasy production?
I think you hit it on the head with the former, which is it helps him. You're talking about a defense that certainly could use some help. And you're talking about a quarterback who is going to be looking for one player and one player only, and that's Kenny Galladay. So I think when you look at the whole system, you look at Anthony Lynn coming in, they are going to have to bring more people into the box. I do expect, as we've talked about a bunch, DeAndre Swift to absolutely explode this year. So I think when you look at going from Goff to going to Goff from Matthew Stafford, being balanced out by the fact that the run game is now going to garner more attention. You obviously went from an Adrian Peterson and Kerryon Johnson combo to now DeAndre Swift, going to the fact that you're seeing TJ Hawkinson come into his own at tight end. I think that could open up that back level. I think that could pull some safeties in a little bit and could get him free. So I think realistically, it's a balancing act, right? When I look at the system as a whole, and when I look at, for example, Anthony Lynn and what his offense brought to Keenan Allen, for example, you're going to see a lot of that. 17 targets a game is what Keenan Allen was hauling in. You give that to a talent like Kenny Galladay, and the sky's the limit, right? So I think when you look at the change in coach is huge. Matt Patricia literally just dragged that team into the ground. So even though he had a great quarterback, he didn't have a system that could support that. So it all hinges on health with me for Kenny Galladay. If you tell me he's healthy and in Detroit, my ranking is way too low. My ranking of 14 is too low, and you're right, his ADP of 18 to 20 is an absolute steal. That's the only thing holding me back on Galladay is a hip injury. Again, we've talked about not a doctor. It sounds scary for a guy who high points the ball, a guy who's explosive, a guy who's pushing off. If you're missing something, if one of your wheels isn't fully inflated, his value drops considerably. So that's the only concern I have with Galladay. Nothing about the system scares me.
Yeah, I love this landing spot, Mike. It's I think you're absolutely right what you're saying about Robinson and Galladay, the fact that they are very similar in terms of what they need. With Galladay was inefficient due to the deep play usage and also the high level of contested catches and red zone targets he received. But we do have to remember he was a wide receiver one in 2019 in Detroit, and it is a wide open wide receiver room. I did wish him to the Bears, but that's only because I put Robinson to the Lions. So I think in an ideal world, if they stayed in the same place, I think that'd be great. But it does look like Robinson's sort of had the bridges burnt there. So it probably would be Detroit as my pick, but I've had to go for the Bears to make it all fit. So I guess just to wrap up on the free agent wide receivers we've discussed so far, out of the 5 you mentioned, Mike, which wide receiver do you like most for Dynasty?
Probably Godwin. If we're talking about sight unseen, Godwin, where we're looking at where we stand. Now that said, and we've kind of covered this as well, Golladay of the 3 has the highest upside when healthy. So I think Godwin's the safest play, which is scary when you're talking about a group with Allen Robinson. But I think Godwin's that combination that I like of higher upside than Robinson with the decent floor, whereas Galladay's floor could be nothing depending on what the hip looks like. I just have flashes of Bo Jackson with him. That's the only comparison I have to a major hip injury on a player. So when you look at these guys, Golladay is the one realistically at cost right now that I'm most interested in by far. We've talked about that wide receiver 18 to 20 cost. He's the one I'm most interested in. However, when you look at if you're a championship, Allen Robinson's the safest play of the bunch. Godwin's the combination of those two. So I'm going to go Godwin because I like to swing for the fences a little bit, but it's definitely those 3 are really, really close in value.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned that. I just wanted to do a bit of a comp on Juju and Godwin. Actually, I know you're lower than the most on Juju, but I just had a quick bit of a deep look at the numbers and taking out Godwin's rookie season where he didn't actually start any games, he appeared in them all, and also taking out Juju's season where he had Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph and all the injuries. I look at the stats, and as a starter, Godwin scores 15.41 fantasy points per game, and Juju scores 15.75 fantasy points per game, which I thought was really interesting because it's not what I thought either. I have Godwin a fair amount higher than Juju. On a target basis, it is slightly different. Godwin's more efficient. He scores 2.16 fantasy points per target to Juju's 1.94. But Juju's 24 and Godwin's 25. So I actually think with Godwin going as wide receiver 12 and Juju going as sort of wide receiver 19, I do think it should be closer in terms of their ADP. But like we said, that the whole tier, it can interchange pretty easily. But for me, Juju at wide receiver 19, I think that current ADP makes him a Pittsburgh steal. What's your thoughts?
No, and I love the comp, and you're right about the numbers. I think what it comes down to for Godwin is, can we get him away from Mike Evans? And does his point per target go up without dealing with one of the best red zone receivers in the NFL? Put some respect on that man's name, people. There's too many people down on Mike Evans. He is a beast, specifically in the red zone. Remember they were calling him the Jordan Howard of wide receivers at the beginning of the year. I heard that comp. And it was funny, don't get me wrong, and I know how it all works out, but Mike Evans is a stud. So I think when you look at realistically with Juju, as we've talked about, there's not many landing spots that could increase his value. So I think that's where you see that baked in ADP, whereas Chris Godwin as a wide receiver 1 without somebody like Mike Evans, I think there's a little more of a ceiling there. But I do love that call out that we seem to value people that are closer in point totals, drastically different based on narratives and based on, and what happens is I think CEH is the perfect corollary for this particular one. Everyone says CEH is a bust. Are you kidding me? 900 yards in his rookie season. What did you want? It was because everybody inflated him too high. And that was the same thing with Juju Smith-Schuster. Everyone put him up at wide receiver 1, I saw in Dynasty. I was like, whoa. Where are we getting off here? And when he tailed off and Matt, to your point, to half a season at wide receiver 9, he was looked as a disappointment. And people have trouble figuring out a disappointment from unrealistic expectations or a disappointment as an NFL player, and they overcorrect. And CEH was a disappointment as the 105 redraft pick because you were idiots for picking him there in the first place. Don't blame the player. That was dumb to begin with. However, people think that CEH was a bust. And I think that's where Juju Kev, to your point, is too low because people that drafted him as their wide receiver 1 were angry. They were bitter and they had a tantrum like children. You see that too much in this game. And that's where you can buy, because his value is somewhere between where we had him coming into 2020 and where we have him coming into 2021. His value is in between those two. The trick is to figure out where, and that's how you end up paying out. But yeah, it's definitely way too much of an overcorrection on players like that.
Yeah, I'm completely like you, mate. I tweeted it out not long ago. Don't hate the player, hate the values. That's what it is. It all comes down to that for me. CEH, he got overinflated. When we were talking about he was going as the rookie 1, or not even RB1, we're talking about the number 1 rookie pick in rookie drafts. It's just crazy. We're all everyone were buying into the upside rather than actually thinking this guy is a rookie. I think his expectations were far too high on somebody like CEH, and for that reason, that's why people hate him. But as you say, it's not the player; it's just the value that we've put on him that we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that's the wide receivers wrapped up with. We'll move on to tight ends now. At tight end, there is a fair amount of real life contributors at free agents, but there's only 2 real standouts from a dynasty perspective. So, who's the first guy you'd like to talk about, Mike?
And the first one's Hunter Henry. Obviously, he's the one we're looking at, and I just got him in the Pigs 3 auction, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, what do I have? It's a tight end premium, and I'm nervous that he's my tight end 1. And in my opinion, having looked all around the league, there's only one spot where I can see Hunter Henry getting better value than his current spot today, and that is the Colts. That is the Frank Reich offense. That is the Carson Wentz at quarterback. That's the Zach Ertz role. That's honestly what we're looking for Hunter Henry, is to be a less broken down Zach Ertz. It's perfect when you look at it from that respect. Now, tight end is a difficult position. A lot to it. It's complicated. So I wouldn't expect a fast start. We talked about this on Wednesday night's podcast. Like I don't expect any fast starts from any tight ends. So ideally for 1 year value, you're not going to get better than the Chargers. You're not going to get better staying with Justin Herbert. However, we also talked about the targets that Keenan Allen sees. So when you're talking long term, you could really look at Hunter Henry getting the lion's share of targets, especially if one of those 2 guys we've mentioned here, whether it be Chris Godwin or Allen Robinson, don't land with the Colts. He could just be peppered with targets, and he could be an absolute beast in that offense. So to me, it's Colts, Chargers, or bust for Hunter Henry. As scary as that sounds for a dude that's talented, that's about all I got for him. Is those are the only 2 spots I want to hear him landing on. As someone who rosters Hunter Henry, I'm going to be nervous as heck until that man signs a contract.
Nah, I think you're completely right on this one, Mike. I think the Colts is the standout tight end landing spot that we all want, whether it be for the rookies. Obviously, Kyle Pitts, everybody's getting excited about him. If he landed on the Colts, wow. I'm getting excited about that one. But yeah, it's just a great spot. Obviously, Henry, he's shown flashes in his career. He obviously had that ACL tear in 2018. That kind of derailed the promising start that he did have. But the talent is there. The Colts, as you say, they love to utilize that tight end position. Eric Ebron finished the tight end 4 in 2018 with the Colts. So just goes to show how much they like to target that tight end position. He mentioned it with Wentz as well. He also likes to target tight ends. Obviously, Zach Ertz, Dallas got it as well when he was with the Eagles. Shown that there obviously is reliable target. Somebody always relies on is that tight end position. So yeah, the Colts is a fantastic landing spot for somebody like Hunter Henry. You did mention that earlier, obviously, about Chris Godwin as well. You'd like to see him land on the Colts. How much do you think that would affect Henry's value if Chris Godwin did land on the Colts as well?
So it would have a slight effect. So when you look at the pros and cons, obviously we've talked about this. If you're the only guy getting targets, that's a little nerve-wracking. Now, what I don't like about Godwin is it's going to depend on how they're going to use him, right? Now, I'm hoping what you see is him winning deep on the outside if you get Chris Godwin, who can play both inside and outside. We've seen it throughout his career. I'm hoping that they're smart enough to move him to the outside. And if they do, it's not a bad thing for Hunter Henry. It's actually possibly a good thing because it takes some pressure off of him. He's running the crossing routes. He's that check down for Wentz. I think I like that setup. However, If they decide that Chris Godwin's going to play on the inside, I hate it for Hunter Henry, right? I mean, that makes it pretty obvious. Now they're next to each other. Now they're potentially running similar patterns, and Chris Godwin is a better player. So my thought would be that they'd be smart enough on how to use them, which would be Godwin and Pittman on the outside, taking the top off the defense, Henry coming across. I don't hate that pairing. That would come down to usage. If he's not there, then all of a sudden you're talking about target volume. So your efficiency may go down, but your number of targets goes up. So I think the Colts are a good landing spot either way. If you told me like on the spot, which I'd prefer, it would be no Godwin. I think Pittman's good enough to take some of the pressure off of. While I'm not a huge Pittman guy, I think he's good enough to take some of the pressure off, and you could fill in with another play, maybe even bring back a T.Y. Hilton, right? So I think if you're talking the perfect scenario for Hunter Henry, not for Carson Wentz, of course, the perfect scenario is for them to keep their receiving core intact and add Hunter Henry, because that's good enough to take pressure off while you're going to get an increased number of targets. So that would be my dream scenario.
Yeah, the Colts would be absolutely amazing landing spot for Hunter Henry. We know Frank Reich loves a tight end. Bit of context, in the last 3 years, they finished 3rd, 6th, and 14th in tight end targets, and that's with rostering guys, scrub players like Jack Doyle, Trey Burton, Mo Cox, and also Carson Wentz has got a high tight end usage in his career. Philly have been a team that's been top 2 in tight end targets in each of the last 5 years. It does help that they had Ertz and Goddard, though, so we can't buy too much into it all being about Wentz. It's to do with personnel slightly as well. I just want to circle back around to your good friend, the Podfather, and his website, Mike. Hunter Henry's best comp on playerprofile.com is Zach Ertz, which is, it just ties it all nicely together. He's only just turned 26, which is still young for a tight end. And he's currently going tight end 9 in startup ADP. So I do believe if he went to the Colts, which is my favorite spot as well, he would be a top 5 tight end with them. So so yeah, we'll move on to the last tight end in this group. Who have you got, Mike?
Jonnu. I think he's the only other one we care about, right? When you look at potential. Yeah, man. So when I look at Jonnu Smith, I want open field. I want him to run. And I think when you look at what Tennessee did with them, specifically when Lewan went down, and then when you talked about when A.J. Brown came back, they just weren't utilizing him. And when you talk open field, wide open offense, what better fit than the Cardinals? You looked at what Dan Arnold did. That man had nobody within 30 yards of him in the second half of the season. It was wild. I'm watching him stand at midfield by himself, like doing jumping jacks, trying to get Murray's attention. So when you look at somebody who is best suited for yards after the catch, who realistically, you're not going to want to square him up if you're a cornerback. He is a large man who adds so much speed. And I do know a little bit about physics, that mass times velocity is going to equal force, right? So you have a big guy who can run, and you let him have that time to get up to top speed. That's where he's gold. And this air raid offense that Cliff Kingsbury runs, we can talk about how suited it is for NFL success. There, have all the debates you want. We are talking about DeAndre Hopkins and Christian Kirk. I think, Kev, you put Will Fuller there as well. Like when you talk about that level of attention required on the outside, that freezing of the linebacker core, because you have arguably the best running quarterback in football under center, all of that opens up that mid-range game. That 12-yard curl in the center of the field, that rollout quarterback who then pulls the linebacker forward, and all of a sudden you have Jonnu Smith. I'm going one player back. You have Jonnu Smith with just a cornerback or a safety in that last level of defense before he takes off. He's too fast to catch from behind. He's too big to tackle square up. This is, without question, of possibly of every dream landing spot we put together, this might be the best fit overall. And Jonnu Smith would be an absolute rocket ship in this offense.
Yeah, I fully agree, Mike. Free Jonnu Smith. I'm a huge fan. I think Kev as well. We're both huge Jonnu Smith fans. Yeah, the spot would be brilliant. As you mentioned, yards after the catch is an absolute monster. And then time with somebody like Cliff Kingsbury, the potential's unreal, I think, with Smith in that kind of offense, getting him in that space. And as you say, just letting him do what he does when he's got the ball in his hand. I mean, I remember a play from a couple of years ago when I think it was like a jet sweep and he turned it into like 57 yards, I think it was. It's just an unreal play. He's just one of those players that if you can utilize him and get him in those, as you say, the open space, then wheels up on someone like Johnny. As you mentioned, Dan Arnold even managed to have some respectable games last season. So if he can do it, then wow, I can't wait to see what somebody like Jonas Smith could do. 25 years old as well, so by no means old for especially a tight end. He's arguably just coming into his prime now. We've seen flashes where you think he's just about to break out. I've been on the train ever since Delaney Walker, ever since he started slowing down and Jono was stepping into that role. I've been on this train and I've been waiting. I keep seeing glimpses that he's going to break out, and then obviously it didn't play out from him last year. But I think this is a great spot, as you say, the fact that it's just an air raid offense, and as we said, if we can just get him into space, then it can be an unbelievable fantasy tight end, I think. In your rankings, as I say, I've been looking at your rankings, Mike. You've got him as a tight end 13. In this situation, then how much more can we move him up from that?
Oh, we'll move him up a lot. Yeah. So Jonas Smith, if he ends up in Arizona, goes up to that Hunter Henry range, which is tight end 8. Yeah. And realistically, Henry, like we talked about, if he goes to the Colts, goes ahead of Goddard. So Henry moves up to tight end 6. And to be quite honest, I would be close to putting Jonnu Smith right at or above Mark Andrews in this particular situation. So he would come in 7 or 8 at that point. Both the now that if you look at my rankings too, obviously Wentz signed afterwards, so I'm a little down on Goddard at this point. So I'd be looking at probably tight end 7, which would put him in the same range as Mark Andrews, Noah Fant, and Hunter Henry. I think he's that level of talent, and obviously ahead of one of my favorites, Irv Smith. You put Irv Smith in Arizona, he's tight end 1 with the bullet. But no, that's about where I'd have him. So I still think Kyle Pitts is just a different cat, right? So I still would take Pitts over Jonnu just for the overall talent, even landing spot on Singh. But right below that, Jonnu really fits well into that tier. Definitely a starting tight end, and I think I'm borderline all-pro in this scenario.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like Matt said, we're big fans of Jonnu. We still believe in that breakout. He's got all the physical tools to be a beast. I think there was a picture released last off-season of him working out with his top off, and he's a well-built dude. I did hate the fact that he got outscored by Anthony Ferguson for most part of 2020, but he did have an injury, didn't he? So I'm hoping that was the reason why. I do think the Cardinals will be a fine landing spot for him. They do need more weapons outside of Nuke, like we mentioned. And also, like you said, Dan Arnold, he's a bum, isn't he? If I could give the listeners and the viewers a piece of advice or something to check out is we've got a very own Matt, and he is a doppelganger of Dan Arnold. So after this show, what you need to do is go to Google, type in Dan Arnold NFL, bring up Matt's profile on Twitter, and you'll be amazed at how similar they look. But Matt's
I just need to grow the hair a bit more.
Yeah,
I just need to grow the hair. If this lockdown carries on for much longer, I might have the hair that Dan Arnold's got.
But be clear with it though. Dan Arnold is a bum. Matt is not a bum. He's a decent chap.
Yeah, I'm all right. At times, I can be all right.
So on that positive note, that brings us to the end of the main section of the show. We're now going to come on to the Fantasy Wildcard section, where we're going to get Mike to pick out a player that he believes will be his Fantasy Wildcard, which is a player that will improve their dynasty value most in 2021. Who have you got, Mike?
Oh, it's Antonio Gibson. So because I wasn't allowed to pick DJ Moore, I was banned from picking DJ Moore. And because I don't want to have all my secrets on DeAndre Swift, we're going to go Antonio Gibson, who I also have in that league, if you remember correctly, because I am a very well-built roster. But so when you look at Gibson, realistically, Gibson had to spend this year proving that he was a running back. Now, my theory is very simply put, they didn't have questions about him as a wide receiver. So when you're training somebody to play a position, you focus on the area of improvement, which for Antonio Gibson was being that between the tackles running back. And what did we see? Gold. I mean, we saw absolute gold, 795 yards and 11 touchdowns in an injury-shortened season for a kid who was a wide receiver by trade. And they brought in J.D. McKissick to take on that receiving. Now, my belief is very simply Washington was not competing this year, and Washington was looking at how do we turn Antonio Gibson into the best player possible. And showing that he could catch the ball was just not needed. I mean, he has the hands. We know that. So I think whether it be 2021 or potentially 2022, what you're going to start seeing is a very heavy increase in the passing game. Now, you take a guy, 800 yards and 11 touchdowns on the ground, and you increase his target share, and you start cutting into the McKissick value, all of a sudden what you have, as much as we've been holding off on the comps, you are looking at a CMC, Alvin Kamara type of player. Now, what amazed me about Antonio Gibson was coming out of the combine, everybody talked about Jonathan Taylor. Size, speed, freak. You guys remember that, right? Mm-hmm. Who's the only other 220 running back to put up the same numbers? It's Antonio Gibson. People forget how physically gifted this man is. If he had put up college numbers like Jonathan Taylor, you'd be talking about him in the same breath. He is equally as physically talented, and he has the perfect coach in Ron Rivera to unlock the cheat code that is a 6'1", 220 wide receiver in the backfield who learned how to play running back as the season went on. This is a guy right now who I have as my dynasty running back 12. And man, I'm probably way too low. I mean, he is the guy who could finish up as the Jonathan Taylor level running back this year and the potential CMC for years to come. He is an absolute cheat code, a guy I'm getting on every roster. He started to pick up value. I picked him up for Noah Fant at a second in a non-tight end premium league right after the draft. And I flipped him in another league. I got him for Melvin Gordon straight up on draft day. People were sleeping on this guy during the draft. They were sleeping on this guy at the beginning of the year. They're starting to catch up now, but not fast enough. They're still lagging, still way behind. This is a guy I'm seeing that, honestly, we talked about him earlier. You could probably get Antonio Gibson straight up for Josh Jacobs. And if I saw that, that's borderline veto-able to me. Not that I ever veto trades, but I'd be disgusted if I saw that the steal you would have. So honestly, I don't see anything other than up for this guy, and considering that he was a running back one his rookie year, to say it's all upside from here is kind of amazing, but that's what we're looking at. His limited passing game value will increase. That's his bread and butter. That's his skill set. It goes up from here, and Antonio Gibson is a running back one for as long as he's healthy.
Yeah, preach it, Mike. I love it. I love Antonio Gibson. I know Kev loves Antonio Gibson. He's currently the RB13 in ADP, but as I say, I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg, I think, with Gibson. As you mentioned, his pass catching ability, what he's shown in Memphis. We've only just seen the rushing side of him in the NFL. Just wait until we unlock that passing upside that he's got. And I honestly don't think it's crazy to talk about a CMC-type rise, and it could quite easily get up to those kind of levels. It's going to be interesting to see, obviously, what happens with McKissick. As you say, I think he's still going to be around next season. But if they have done, as you say, and they just want to see what they've got in Gibson, what he can do rushing it, and now they're going to give him the keys. Wow. I mean, as you say, top 5, top 7, that's very easily achievable, I think, if not higher. I was going to ask you a question, but I think I already know the answer to it, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Mike. His ADP RB13, that's behind vets like Zeke and Josh Jacobs. I'm going to ask you, would you give those guys straight up for Antonio Gibson? And no. Is there any other big name vets that you would give up straight up to get Gibson?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to talk big names. I would give up to get Antonio Gibson. I'd be real close on Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
I would give up Zeke Elliott. I would give up James Robinson. I would give up Austin Eckler. I would give up the 101 in one quarterback leagues to get him. Joe Mixon, Miles Sanders. There is a heap of players that people are in on right now that I would give up. So I would say straight dollar for dollar flip. Antonio Gibson for me is Aaron Jones and Derrick Henry level value right this second. That's the names you want to put him with. And I think this year he has the opportunity to vault over Nick Chubb and possibly even a Dalvin Cook type who's had trouble staying healthy. I think Dalvin Cook's a better running back overall. I think Dalvin Cook might be the most talented running back in football. However, when you look at overall value, Antonio Gibson's really creeping up on that. So those are the big names I have him with. But absolutely, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, without question. I'd be asking what they want me to throw in. I'd probably throw a second into the deal just so I can get it vetoed. You know what I mean? Just like, no, you're way off here. But yeah, Antonio Gibson, I would give up a ton for. I think realistically, like we've talked about, I play ceiling.
Yeah.
First or last, it's dynasty. So Antonio Gibson is such a high ceiling. He's a guy I want on every roster. And honestly, the only reason I don't have to worry about it is because I believe I have close to 100% exposure on Antonio Gibson at this point.
Oh, that's awesome, that Mike. It's you're such a hero on this selection. We love Gibson at the Fantasy Wildcard. Our show a couple of weeks back, our 2020 rookie mock show, the show was titled Antonio Gibson Discount GOAT. So that just sums up exactly our feelings. And I'm going to pat myself on the back here. I did say on that show that Gibson has the highest upside of any 2020 rookie RB. So him being your wildcard selection, it confirms that we're both extremely smart and handsome guys, Mike.
We knew that going in, I think.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the show where we've discussed Mike's dream free agent landing spots from a dynasty perspective. Thank you, Mike. You've been an absolute pleasure to have on. You've brought us so much detailed analysis on your picks and your selections. I've had so much fun. My cheeks are hurting. It's not like the Mike Williams effect from this morning, but the other cheeks. So I'll just throw it back over to you now, Mike. Is there anything you'd like to share or plug with the audience?
Honestly, I am just a small part of such an unbelievable team over at Fantasy Intervention. There's a lot of guys that probably you haven't heard of. We talked about earlier on backstage. I'm wildly overfollowed, and the rest of the team is completely underfollowed. So check out Join Us Circle _. Check out a lot of the stuff we have coming out. We have Jacob Sanderson actually just went to Roto Underworld to work for my buddy Matt. Great get for them. We have Thomas over there. We have Jeff. We have the best image guys in the world in Steven and Bob. And we're bringing up now a class that's just coming out of training of some of the people that are just going to absolutely explode onto the scene. So when you take a look at anything that you hear me talk about, anything you see me do, just realize it's because I'm surrounded by such intelligent people and they make me look good, which is really hard to do. I appreciate the compliment, Kevin, but I'm neither attractive or all that smart. I really just learn how to pick the best from people. So honestly, if I could plug anything, it would not be, following me. I am what I am. I make jokes on Twitter, but these guys are really smart. So I couldn't recommend any more. Every single member of our team. So go check out the squad, and I can vouch for every single one of them. They'll just make you a smarter, better fantasy player without question.
No, that's perfect, Mike. Thank you for that. And is there anything from you, Matt, you want to add on the back of Mike's sentiments there?
No, I just want Mike, I'm obviously a big fan of all you guys over at Fantasy Intervention. I know I spoke to Chase a little bit, and I'm a huge fan of everything you're doing over there, yourself and also all the other guys there. So yeah, just keep doing your thing. You say don't follow you, but I fully endorse people following you, Mike. You're brilliant. What you bring to the community and to Twitter. I mean, I've loved just being able to interact with you and getting to know you over this last year. And I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on the podcast. I mean, I could have talked to you for another 2 hours. It's been a brilliant podcast. So yeah, just thanks a lot and keep crushing it, mate.
No, this is great, guys. I honestly appreciate the invite. Like I told you, I was so stoked about this podcast, and the fact that it exceeded my expectations is shocking because I had such high expectations coming in. So this was so much fun.
I know you're joining our good friend Dynasty Allen as well, aren't you, on his podcast soon as well? So that should be a good one.
Yeah, so I think I have Rich a week from Friday, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, we're going full British invasion of Mike going across the board. So that'll be. I think we're doing rookie wide receivers, if I'm not mistaken.
Nice.
So that'll be a lot of fun. And obviously, you guys know I've been a huge fan of all of you guys, and I think met all of you roughly about the same time. So it's been pretty cool to be able to finally talk face to face with everybody.
Absolutely.
Smashing. We'll be sure to check that one out as well next Friday. It's a very interesting topic, and obviously it's two guys we love as well. So do check that out as well. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Wildcard. We also have our Linktree site on our Twitter page where you can find all of our podcasts and shows on YouTube. Please check it out and subscribe. Our next show is Tuesday, the 9th of March, where we'll be analysing the Dynasty running back landscape. Thank you once again. Thank you for coming on, Mike. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And we'll see you again very soon.
Cheers, guys.